Good morning, everyone. I would like to call this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee to order and welcome everyone in attendance. My name is Irfan Sabir, the MLA for Calgary-Buller-McCall and Chair of the committee. As we begin this morning, I would like to invite members, guests, and LAO staff at the table to introduce themselves, and we will begin to my right.
Arthur Ozol, MLA, Vermilion, Lloydminster, Wainwright.
Ron Weeb, MLA for Grand Prairie, Wapiti.
Tara Sawyer, MLA for Old Didsbury Three Hills.
Morning, everyone. Brandon Lunty, MLA for Leduc Beaumont.
Good morning, Christina Mippo, Executive Director of the Indigenous Women's Initiatives Division with Indigenous Relations.
Good morning. My name is Don Quas. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister of First Nations and Métis Relations with the Ministry of Indigenous Relations.
Good morning, everyone. Donovan Young, Deputy Minister of Indigenous Relations.
Good morning, everyone. Shakib Siddiqui, Senior Financial Officer.
Good morning, everyone. Thomas Giroforce, and I'm Assistant Deputy Minister for Consultation, Land and Policy with Indigenous Relations.
Good morning, Patty Hayes, Assistant Auditor General.
Marlon Schmidt, Edmonton Gold Bar.
Marie Renault, St. Albert.
Good morning. MLA for Calgary Curry, Janet Araменko.
Good morning, Nancy Robert, Clerk of Journals and Committees.
Warren Huffman, Committee Clerk.
Thank you. We will now go to those joining us online. Please introduce yourself as the clerk calls your name.
Ms. Lovely.
Good morning, everyone. Jackie Lovely, MLA for the Camrose constituency.
And Ms. DeYoung.
Good morning, Chantal DeYoung, MLA for Chestnut Strathmore.
Thank you. I would note for the record the following substitutions. Mr. Weeb for Honorable Mr. McDougall, Member Araменko for Mr. Ellingson, Ms. Hoyer for Mrs. Johnson, and Ms. Lovely for Honorable Ms. Armstrong Hamanek. A few housekeeping items to address before we turn to the business at hand. Please note that the microphones are operated by Hansard staff. Committee proceedings are live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. The audio and video stream and transcripts of meetings can be accessed via the Legislative Assembly website. Those participating by video conference are encouraged to please turn on your camera while speaking and mute your microphone when not speaking. Members participating virtually who wish to be placed on a speaker list are asked to email or send a message to the committee clerk, and members in the rooms are asked to please signal to the chair. Please set your cell phones and other devices to silent for the duration of the meeting, and comments at all times should flow through the chair. Honorable members, are there any changes or addition to the agenda? If not, so you don't have any?
No, okay. Sorry.
If not, would a member move that the Standing Committee on Public Accounts approve the proposed agenda as distributed for its October 28, 2025 meeting? Moved by MLA Roswell. All in favor? And any opposed? All in favor joining us online?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion is carried. We have minutes from the October 21, 2025 meeting of the committee. Do members have any errors or omissions to note? If not, would a member? Okay, go ahead.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a couple of omissions that I'd like to highlight from last meeting's minutes. So the minutes do note that on October 21st, the UCP members of this committee voted to make no recommendations on the Auditor General's condition of affordable housing report. But what the minutes omit is that by doing so, government members have failed to uphold their responsibility to the public by allowing the department to continue doing nothing about the condition of public housing in Alberta. Public accounts exists for one purpose: to follow the dollars, demand answers, and drive improvements so that public services work for people. The Auditor General's report documents deteriorating housing stock, mounting maintenance backlogs, and inconsistent oversight that leaves seniors and families waiting in unsafe or unstable conditions. By refusing to issue recommendations, the UCP is telling those Albertans that their safety and dignity do not matter. Affordable housing is public infrastructure. When roofs leak and boilers fail, people get sick, kids miss school, and we all pay the price. Accountability is how we prevent that. Government backbenchers chose to look away. The NDP won't. We will stand with tenants, nonprofits, and frontline staff to ensure that this report leads to repairs and not excuses, and to results that Albertans can see unit by unit, family by family. The minutes also note that the government members voted to cancel the November 18th session. What the minutes omit is that audit-focused meetings were the choice of the government members, and that's where the hard questions get asked in public and on the record. Scrapping this hearing shields decision makers from scrutiny, buries lessons the report demands we learn, and signals to every other department that no one is going to hold them accountable for their failure to deliver results for the people of Alberta. We also know that the Auditor General is reviewing the Dynalife contract and procurement practices in the health system, reviews that have a high potential for revealing government corruption. The minutes omit that by voting to end the November 18th Auditor General focused meeting, that the government also intends to prevent this committee from reviewing those reports when they become available. I conclude my remarks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to call 2 points of order. I don't know if you'd like them separately or together. I'll start with 23B. Member was speaking to matters other than the question under discussion by providing a editorial after the fact on meeting minutes. The PAC meeting minutes, of course, reflect the discussion of the last committee meeting. The point of meeting minutes are not to add on a separate soliloquy or editorial. So this is a point of order 23B. Those comments were not relevant to our meeting minutes. I understand the member may very well feel that way, or may take the opportunity to the media or in the House to express those sentiments, but the opportunity to correct our meeting minutes is certainly not the place to do that. In addition, Mr. Chair, I would also like to call a point of order 23I, imputes false or unavowed motives to another member. Member opposite made several claims that would against the opposition members and members of this, or of the government members and members on this committee, about his opinion on our commitment to some of the topics that were discussed last time, which again, the member is within his right to feel that way, but is not in the right to accuse our members of the actions that he was pointing out when it comes to the government business that was discussed last time. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, an opportunity to respond. It's remarkable that this member has been on this committee for at least 2 years and refuses to understand how points of order work. He keeps raising these points of order that aren't actually points of order. You know, I expect that the government will walk into the House at some point in the near future and amend the standing order so that hurt feelings become a point of order, because that's exactly what this member is complaining about today. My comments were in regard to omissions that I felt appeared in the meeting minutes, and it's well within my rights as a member of this committee to raise those omissions that I think should have been included in the meeting minutes. With respect to the member's point of order with 23I, I didn't single out any particular member for doing anything. I painted all of the backbenchers with the same brush, which has been the accepted practice of the legislature in this committee. So neither of these things are a point of order, and I ask that the chair rule that they are not points of order.
Thank you. With respect to 23B, remember you noted that it's not an opportunity to correct the minutes. I think that's exactly what this agenda item deals with, that any errors or omissions, but I didn't really find anything, I guess, omitted from the minutes, because minutes are only to reflect the decisions, and that was mostly around the context that would be in the Hansard of committee proceeding. But as such, I do not find this to be completely irrelevant, because member tried to note some omissions, which I guess I do not necessarily think need to be noted in the minutes. So I won't find a point of order. And with respect to H, 23H makes allegation against another member. 23I imputes false motive to another member. Again, I didn't find any particular members singled out or any false motive imputed to one member, so I will not find this as a point of order, but I guess I would still caution that we can keep our conversation flow through the chair, and I guess make this committee work in a more respectful manner. With that, I think I will move on to so at this point I still need somebody to move that Standing Committee on Public Account approve the minutes as distributed of its meeting held on October 21, 2025. Moved by Emily Roswell. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. All in favor joining us online?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Ayes have it. Motion is carried.
Before we get into the discussion with Indigenous Relations, I have a motion that I'd like to move, if I could. Thank you. So last week, of course, we saw UCP backbenchers walk away from their duty to hold departments to account, and I would like to change the speaking orders to reflect the fact that the UCP backbenchers aren't willing to do the job that Albertans sent them here to do, and of course reflect the fact that we here in the official opposition are more than willing to step up and do the job of holding the departments to account. And so for those reasons, I'm moving that the Standing Committee on Public Accounts use the following speaking time allotment for members after opening remarks have been made to the committee by the chair, ministry officials, and the official office of the Auditor General. 1, for a 1.5-hour meeting. A, for the first and second rotations of questions, 19 minutes for the official opposition caucus and 1 minute for the government caucus. For the third rotation, 9 minutes for the official opposition caucus and 1 minute for the government caucus. And for the fourth rotation, 3 minutes for each of the official opposition and government caucuses to read questions into the record for a written response. 2, for a 2-hour meeting with a morning sitting. For the first rotation of questions, 23 minutes for the official opposition caucus and 1 minute for the government caucus. For the second, third, and fourth rotations, 17 minutes for the official opposition caucus and 1 minute for the government caucus. And for the fifth rotation, 3 minutes each for the official opposition and the government caucuses to read questions into the record for a written response. For a 2-hour meeting without a morning sitting. For the first rotation of questions, 29 minutes for the official opposition caucus and 1 minute for the government caucus. For the second, third, and fourth rotations, 19 minutes for the official opposition caucus and 1 minute for the government caucus. And for the fifth rotation, 3 minutes each for the official opposition and the government caucuses to read questions into the record for a written response. And 4, for a 3-hour meeting for the first and second rotations of questions, 29 minutes for the official opposition caucus and 1 minute for the government caucus. B, for the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth rotations, 19 minutes for the official opposition caucus and 1 minute for the government caucus. And C, for the seventh rotation, 3 minutes each for the official opposition and the government caucuses to read questions into the record for a written response. Mr. Chair, of course, last week's meeting, we saw the government vote to make sure that the Public Accounts Committee doesn't do any work. It's been the practice, and we noted this particularly egregiously at the October 14th meeting. Of course, the government submits their questions to the department ahead of time, and the department reads the answers that they've prepared. It's obvious to everyone who's watching that the government and the department collude to make sure that nothing of substance happens here at Public Accounts, and I'm sure we'll see that today. I'm sure that we'll see the Deputy Minister read responses to that he's prepared to questions that the government has prepared ahead of time. Why engage in this circus? We here in the official opposition are genuinely committed to the work of holding the departments to account, and I think these speaking times reflect that commitment. If the government wants to have this back and forth circus, they can have it somewhere else. Public Accounts isn't the place to do it, and so I urge all members to vote in favor of this motion.
Thank you. Anybody wants to respond? Okay. I think speaking rotations are set by the committee's agreement, so I will just ask the question that all those in favor of changing the speaking rotation as suggested by this motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Those joining us online? All those against changing the rotation or against the motion that's before the committee? No. Those joining us online?
No.
No.
Motion is defeated. I would like to welcome now our guests from the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and the Office of the Auditor General, who are here to address the Ministry's Annual Report 2024-25, the responsibilities under their purview during that reporting period, and relevant reports and outstanding recommendation of the Auditor General. I invite the official from the Ministry to provide opening remarks not exceeding 10 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. Again, my name is Donovan Young. I'm the Deputy Minister of Indigenous Relations. To my immediate left is Don Quas, the ADM of First Nations and Métis Relations. Next to Don Quas is Christina Midbo from the Sawridge First Nation, Executive Director of Indigenous Women's Initiatives. On my right is Shakib Siddiqui, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister of Finance and the SFO for the department. And next to Shakib is Thomas Jufors, who is the ADM of Consultation, Land and Policy. And we also have some staff members in the gallery who are here to assist in answering any questions. So I'm pleased to provide an update on the Indigenous Relations Audit Recommendation Implementation Plan. In May 2022, the OAG recommended that we improve how we measure and report on the outcomes of programs supporting Indigenous economic inclusion. The goal is to help increase participation in initiatives designed to generate long-term revenue streams or to develop supports and programs aligned with unique priorities of Indigenous communities. Following the OAG's confirmation and support of Indigenous Relations Implementation Plan, we have worked diligently to successfully complete the plan. And I'm happy to say, everyone, that Indigenous Relations has implemented performance measures and targets for all of its programs. So by setting performance targets and measures, we can better assess how our programs are working. This includes reviewing feedback from funding recipients, comparing results of what was originally planned, looking at program cost, and checking whether the programs are meeting user needs. We also report on what was achieved and what we learned and how the results support the Ministry's overall goals. The Office of the OAG will return to evaluate the implementation of the above items, and we're proud of the progress that we've made, and we're confident in our readiness for that review. So now it's our pleasure to speak to the work of Indigenous Relations during the fiscal year 2024-25. Economic reconciliation remains a central focus for our ministry, so I'd like to begin there. In 2024-25, the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund, or ABIF, provided $10 million in capital grants to 20 Indigenous community-owned economic development projects. That is a record number of projects, a direct result of increasing, improving, and promoting this program in recent years. This funding is helping communities grow their economies, create jobs, and build sustainable revenue streams. The Indigenous Reconciliation Initiative is another key program, and it funds both economic and cultural projects. In 24-25, $4 million was provided through the program to support nearly 70 Indigenous-led initiatives, including feasibility studies, strategic planning, wellness programs, and community celebrations. Our flagship Crown Corporation, the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, or AIOC, is helping drive more opportunities for Indigenous communities to participate in major investments as owners and partners. The AIOC closed 2 new investments in 24-25, bringing total loan guarantee support to date to nearly $750 million for 43 Indigenous communities. One of these deals represented the AIOC's first partnership in a renewable energy investment. It provided a $22 million loan backstop to Cold Lake First Nation so it could become the majority owner of a new solar farm in Dutchess, Alberta. Once the solar plant comes online in 2026, it will power about 7,000 homes. In October 2024, we expanded the AIOC's mandate to include tourism, and we recently expanded it again to include technology and healthcare sectors. These sectors join natural resources, transportation, agriculture, and telecommunications as the industries eligible for AIOC support. Moving now to Indigenous Women's Initiatives Division, which provided grants through the Community Support Fund to support 24 Indigenous-led projects aimed at improving the safety, well-being, and economic security of Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit Plus people. These initiatives are making a real difference, improving the lives of the people this fund was designed to support. This division also serves as the secretariat to the Premier's Council on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit Plus people. The Council met 9 times in 24-25, engaging experts, organizations, ministries across Alberta's government, and other partners to discuss a wide variety of challenges and potential solutions. Indigenous Women's Initiatives also work closely with the Ministry of Arts, Culture, and Status of Women to administer nearly $1.4 million in grant funding for Indigenous-led actions to end gender-based violence. And the First Nations and Métis Women's Councils on Economic Security continue to provide advice to address economic security for Indigenous women in Alberta. These are great examples of the effective partnerships we have across government that are helping us address major issues across the province. This past year, our ministry continued to strengthen relationships with Indigenous communities and organizations. We build relationships in many ways, but perhaps most intentionally through protocol and relationship agreements. We've signed formal agreements with the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Stoney Nakoda Tsuut'ina Tribal Council, Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations, and the Métis Settlements General Council, and we're currently working towards a similar agreement with Treaty 8 First Nations of Alberta. These agreements facilitate effective and productive collaboration through work plans with relevant ministers and Indigenous leaderships. The results are reported annually at meetings with Premier Smith, ministers, and Indigenous relations. And we also have a framework agreement with the Métis Nation of Alberta. This work is helping shape long-term partnerships and results, ensuring Indigenous voices are reflected in Alberta's government decision-making. Indigenous Relations continues to support Indigenous communities through the wildfire season, collaborating with the Alberta Emergency Management Agency, Indigenous Services Canada, and many other partners to assist affected communities through the response and recovery processes. Last year, we also contributed to building emergency response capacity by securing $1 million to fund directors of emergency management on all 8 Métis settlements. Consultation is another cornerstone of the work we do. In 24-25, the ACO, the Aboriginal Consultation Office, supported 8,400 land and resource development applications, resulting in roughly 11,400 Crown-led activities. I should say Crown land activities. The ACO also delivered 58 information sessions to industry proponents, Indigenous communities, and other ministries. To support participation in these processes, we provided $6.6 million in Indigenous consultation capacity, funding 60 Indigenous communities. We also provided $1.3 million in Métis credible assertion capacity funding to 10 Métis organizations to help them address capacity challenges related to the credible assertion process. 24-25 also marked the conclusion of Alberta's obligations under the Canada-Alberta Agreement respecting the 2018 land claim settlement for the Lubicon Lake Band. This was a historic milestone in the province's relationship with Indigenous peoples. Internally, we continue to educate public servants through the Indigenous Learning Initiative in even greater numbers. In 24-25, we delivered more than 100 sessions, a 20% increase from the previous year, to Alberta Public Service members. This program builds cultural understanding and supports respectful, informed engagement with Indigenous communities across government and is part of the response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. But I want to touch on something you may have noticed when you look at our ministry expenditures for 24-25 versus what was estimated at budget time. There is a $15 million discrepancy, $235 million for the actual, but $220 million estimated at budget. The main reason for this was higher gaming revenues collected at government-owned slot machines and First Nations casinos. The gaming revenue is a funding source for the First Nations Development Fund, or FNDF, that supports economic, social, and community development. Gaming revenue forecasts are provided by Alberta Gaming, Liquor, and Cannabis, and they are based on consumer trends, which means they can change over time. This can also vary greatly depending on changes in consumer trends. When more people use slot machines in First Nations casinos, the FNDF receives more money to support First Nations projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. I would now turn it over to the Assistant Auditor General for her comments. Ms. Hayes, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee members and officials joining us from the Department of Indigenous Relations, and thank you for the opportunity to provide an overview of the work of the Office of the Auditor General. We audit the Department of Indigenous Relations to the extent necessary to support our audit opinion of the province's consolidated financial statements. We also audit the financial statements of the ministry's component entity, the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. And for the year ended March 31st, 2025, we issued a clean opinion for the corporation. We made no new recommendations to either the department or the corporation based on our 24-25 financial audit work. However, there is one outstanding recommendation to the department from our May 2022 performance audit on Indigenous economic participation. That audit examined whether the Departments of Indigenous Relations and, at the time, Labour and Immigration had effective processes to assess and report on the results of programs designed to support economic self-reliance and increase participation by Indigenous peoples in Alberta's economy. We concluded that while both departments had processes in place to assess and report on program results, not all of these processes were effective and improvements are needed. Without effective monitoring and reporting, the Department of Indigenous Relations risks not achieving its planned results and not demonstrating value for taxpayer dollars spent. Long-term goals may be compromised by short-term considerations, and without the right information, decisions about what's working and what needs to change may not be well informed. So we recommended that the department improve its performance reporting processes for programs aimed at increasing Indigenous economic participation by implementing performance measures and targets for all programs, analyzing program performance, including reporting from funding recipients against user needs, planned results, and program costs, and finally, reporting its analysis of program results and progress towards ministry outcomes, including lessons learned. The department has indicated that this recommendation is ready for assessment, and we are in the midst of completing an assessment, and we'll be finished that within the coming months. I want to thank the management group here today for their time, cooperation, and assistance during our work. And that concludes my opening comments, Chair.
Thank you. We will now hear questions from committee members. We will begin with the Official Opposition Caucus, and you have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So page 24 of the annual report states that the department engages in advocacy for Jordan's Principle. In February of 2025, the federal government announced sweeping changes to programs funded according to Jordan's Principle, including funding for educational assistance in Alberta schools. The CBC reported that at least 450 full and part-time educational assistant job losses resulted because of these funding changes. I'm wondering, did the department advocate to the federal government for continued funding for educational assistance in Alberta schools?
Thanks for the question, and I may turn to Thomas Dufour in a moment for additional detail. But off the top of my head, we absolutely did. I remember when that issue was raised. We worked with the Department of Education, in particular the First Nations Métis and Inuit Education branch, to ensure that letters were written from provincial ministers to federal ministers advocating for Jordan's Principle and for, funding to be maintained. So absolutely, we advocated with the federal government. That is one of the responsibilities of the department, is liaison with the federal government and ensuring that, Indigenous issues are brought to bear. Thomas, am I missing anything?
No. Thank you, Deputy Minister. That answers the question. I hope that the Deputy Minister can table for the committee the letters that the department sent to the federal government, just to show that work happened. So obviously the department's advocacy efforts failed. The government has not reversed their decision to fund these educational assistance through Jordan's Principle. Now, it's my understanding that Jordan's Principle means that when there is a funding need, one government or the other will step up and provide the funding so that the First Nations students, in this case, don't suffer any ill effects of interjurisdictional squabbles, and then you sort out the funding later. Did the Department of Indigenous Relations give advice to education that education should step up and fund these educational assistants that were no longer funded by the federal government?
I can't recall off the top of my head the exact nature of the advocacy. It likely included a strong recommendation to the federal government to maintain its funding. But again, that would be something you'd probably want to put to the Ministry of Education.
But as far as the department recalls, you didn't give any advice to the Department of Education that they should actually meet the spirit of Jordan's Principle by funding these EAs in the absence of federal funding?
As I say, I can't recall off the top of my head if we provided that advice. But we also, really urged the federal government to Can I finish?
No, I got the answer
Chair,
to my...
can I finish?
I got the answer to my question, Deputy Minister.
Member, conversation need to flow through the chair. So, go ahead, Dave.
So one of our key functions, and we take it very, very seriously, is holding the federal government's feet to the fire to ensure that their fiduciary obligations regarding...
We don't have a lot of time. I have a lot of questions to get through. I got the answer to the question from the Deputy Minister that I wanted. My question was regarding the efforts that the Deputy Minister made to the Educational Department.
So let's move on.
Thank you very much. So I hope that the Deputy Minister can contact staff who are likely watching these proceedings and find out in response to another question later in the meeting what advocacy efforts the department made to the Educational Ministry in this department. So I want to move on to the AIOC. So the AIOC has provided $750 million in loan guarantees on several projects during its first 5 years of existence. The stated goal of the corporation is to provide loan guarantees that facilitate investments that pay returns to Indigenous communities. Can the department tell the committee how much financial return these investments have made for Indigenous communities in the 24-25 fiscal year?
Well, I can tell you that the AIRC estimates that about $1.4 billion in projected distributions will flow to participating Indigenous communities over the lifetime of the project supported.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. That information is publicly available on the AIC website, and that doesn't actually answer the question, how much financial return has been delivered to Indigenous communities in the 24-25 fiscal year.
The total distributions back to Indigenous communities as of March 31st, 2025 is $68,291,064.31 as of March 31st, 2025, and that's for the fiscal year?
No, that's up to March 31st, 2025 from when the first deal came through.
So that's cumulative. Thank you. Now, does that meet any targets that the AIOC has had in place for returns achieved by the five-year mark?
Yeah, absolutely it is. The AIRC has been tremendously successful. I mean, we look at broad milestones, and as I say, $1.4 billion in projected distributions over the lifetime of those projects. 43 Indigenous communities have been positively impacted by the AIRC. So we're as government, we're very happy with the progress of the AIRC and the headway that it's making and the difference that it's making in the lives of Indigenous people at the community level.
Thank you to the Deputy Minister. He said there are broad milestones, and yet he refrained from actually saying whether or not there was a milestone that had been achieved with the $68 million. And certainly the Auditor General has taken the department to task for not providing meaningful performance measures in its own department. I would suggest that the department also look at AIOC's performance measures and tighten those up. Now, according to the AIOC's website, a potential project called the Aspen Project fell through because of structural issues within TC Energy's NGTL partnership. Can the department explain to the committee the details of these structural issues and why it led to a failure to close this deal?
No, I can't. That was never disclosed by the proponent. They left it as structural issues were the issue, were the problem, and the precise nature of those structural issues were never disclosed.
So in the budget for the 24-25 fiscal year, the department anticipated closing this deal and in fact booked revenue or had budgeted revenue from AIOC's loan guarantees because they expected to close this deal. So when TC Energy said we can't do it, what work did the AIOC do to understand exactly why that deal failed and what they can do to maybe advance that deal or make another deal of a similar magnitude successful in the future?
Well, they actually did do that work that you just mentioned. I know, but at the moment I'm not able to comment because it's not in the public realm, that there are a couple of deals in the very near pipeline of the AIOC in related areas that hopefully will come to fruition in the next few months. And I think then you will see the good work of the AIOC that continues to benefit Indigenous communities.
But we won't see any lessons learned from the failure of this particular deal. Is that what the Deputy Minister is telling the committee?
Well, you have to also remember that this was not an AIOC issue or problem. This was a TC Energy. TC Energy pulled the plug on the deal because of a structural issue. This was not caused by the AIOC.
Well, then I would expect that the Deputy Minister would be more willing to talk about exactly why the AIOC failed to close this deal if it wasn't in fact their fault. Now I want to move on to another issue. So according to the AIOC's annual report, The CEO's salary went from $311,000 in 2024 to $347,000 in a year. That's a 12% increase, and in fact, $36,000 a year is more than what an educational assistant makes. Given that this government just legislated a 3% annual increase for teachers, what has the department done to rein in skyrocketing executive compensation at the AIOC?
Well, the department, first of all, does not oversee public sector compensation.
So, if I can stop the department there, correct me if my understanding is wrong. The department appoints the board of the AIOC, and the AIOC board answers to the deputy minister. Is that correct?
Wrong.
Okay, then tell me.
You said point out to you if you're wrong, you're wrong.
Yeah, okay.
You got it wrong on about 2 or 3 different fronts.
Well then, what is the government?
Will you let me finish?
What is the government's mechanism then?
So, first of all, the salaries of the AIOC executives are reviewed and regulated by the Provincial Bargaining and Compensation Office in Treasury Board and Finance. They're not regulated by the Department of Indigenous Relations. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, the board does not report to me. I'm an observer on the board for the government. The minister recommends to cabinet who should sit on the board, and cabinet ultimately approves the board of directors on the recommendation of the minister. I'm there as an observer to provide a link between government policy and the work of the AIOC. I'm a non-voting board member. They certainly don't report to me. They have an independent board of directors made up of business, people well experienced in business, an expert board of directors who have an arm's length from government, and they manage the affairs of the AIOC, the board of directors. And government's, if you will, input is through the appointment of those board members, which we do along the way.
Thank you to the department for the candid answer. He's obviously been on the board, seen these skyrocketing executive compensation, and says there's nothing he can do about it. That's a real shame. Now, according to the AIOC's annual report, annual operating expenses for salaries and benefits for the total organization is about $3 million a year. Of that, more than $1.5 million is spent on executive salaries for 5 people. That's half of the operating budget of the AIOC. Now, given that, yes, I can assure the department, the deputy minister, that that is true. Now, given that other loan guarantee programs, like the Feeder Association loan program, are operated by government directly, can the department tell us whether the people of Alberta are getting value for money by paying for so many executives for doing something that the government could do directly for less money?
Well, I guess I would challenge the premise of the government, that the government should operate this organization or this work on its own. The government should just take this on. As I said, we've appointed an expert board of directors who have investment business experience. And if you look at the resumes of the board members, you'll see they're very well qualified in business and investments. And that kind of expertise certainly does not exist in the Department of Indigenous Relations. So like many, many corporations, a board of directors is appointed, arm's length from the government, and then that board is given the mandate to run the organization based on its expertise and so on. And that's what the government chose to do 6 years ago, to appoint an independent, quasi-independent, arm's length organization with the inherent expertise and track record to oversee the kinds of investments that the AIOC makes. It's a proven model that works.
Oh, yeah, sure. For $3 million, for $1.5 million for 5 people to oversee this, when teachers had a salary legislated increase of 3%, it's offensive, I think, to the people of Alberta to think that some government employees are making so much money. ABIF performance measures rely on self-reporting. I'm wondering what independent verification of the results has the department done on ABIF grants?
I'll ask Don Quast to answer that question.
Sure.
He oversees the program.
The staff in my division, we look after the economic development programs that Indigenous Relations funds, including Aboriginal Business Investment Fund. Staff on our team has really pretty solid contact with each of the applicants and the recipients.
Thank you. We will now move to the government members for 15-minute block with MLA Lenti.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and welcome to our ministry officials for joining us this morning. We certainly appreciate the hard work that you do and for coming to join us and answering our questions and providing a little more information about this extremely important area and extremely important ministry to our government. Since you only had 30 seconds or so, maybe I'd like to actually drill down a little bit on the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund and give the officials a chance to talk a little bit more about the economic impact of that fund. So, of course, through the chair, I'd like to ask, a couple questions, but I'll start on page 25-26 of the annual report, where the ministry reported that in the 24-25 fiscal year, the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund invested $10 million to support 20 Indigenous community-owned economic development projects across multiple sectors, which created about 145 Indigenous jobs. So, Deputy, can you please explain how the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund has contributed to strengthening Indigenous participation in Alberta's economy over the past fiscal year?
Yes, and thanks for the question. ABIF, or the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund, continues to be a vital part of advancing Indigenous economic participation across Alberta. Over the past year, ABIF supported a diverse range of community-owned businesses across Alberta, from tourism and food services to construction and agriculture. Each project contributes to local job creation, skills development, and long-term economic sustainability. The projects supported last year spanned the entire province. Some examples include Kainai Forge purchasing equipment for their agricultural businesses in southern Alberta, and Little Red River Cree Nation expanding their 5th Meridian market. ABIF has had a significant impact across the province. 20 Indigenous community-owned businesses received capital funding in 24-25 to improve social and economic outcomes in their communities. Some examples of the projects that ABIF supported in 24-25 included Fort McMurray 468 First Nation, which received $600,000 in funding to open an A&W restaurant on Highway 881. The project promotes economic diversification efforts into the food service industry and created 22 permanent full-time jobs for community members. Ochise Marketplace, which received $250,000 in funding to expand their business to include a new cafe and laundromat and improving fuel facilities. After the expansion, the business will employ 49 community members, support community programs, and attract more visitors to the community. In 24-25, ABIF created 145 jobs in sectors that include agriculture, tourism and culture, healthcare, and retail trade. Supporting Indigenous community-owned businesses is part of Alberta government's commitment to ensure the full participation of Indigenous people in all aspects of Alberta's economy and society. Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you, Deputy, for that information. It's certainly exciting to hear about projects all across the province, as you mentioned, and across various sectors. We tend to agree with your assessment that we can strengthen Aboriginal business and Aboriginal business ownership. It's certainly a benefit to the province. I would like to ask a follow-up question on the ABIF program related to assessment of the program. So through the chair, How does the department assess whether the investments that you highlighted are achieving their intended economic and employment outcomes?
Yes, thanks for the question. We assess the effectiveness of ABIF investments through a combination of performance metrics, community feedback, and ongoing project monitoring. Each funded project is required to submit a detailed business plan outlining expected economic and employment outcomes. These include projected job creation, revenue generation, and community benefits. Once approved, we track progress of these projects against these benchmarks through regular reporting and, if operationally feasible, site visits. The department also follows up with successful recipients 2 years after their grants have been closed to determine the 2-year survivability of these projects. Thank you.
Thanks for that information, Deputy. Appreciate that. I would like to cede and turn the next question over to my colleague, MLA Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I do want to commend the department. I spoke with someone a couple of weeks ago who credited the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund and how it helped them create something, so it is working. On page 21 of the 2024-25 annual report, the ministry notes that it engages Indigenous peoples as economic partners and makes sure major projects proceed while meeting Alberta's legal duty to consult. It highlights the need to balance Indigenous participation with economic growth. So, two-part question for you. How does the Alberta government ensure this balance is maintained in practice? Is the first piece. And the second piece would be, how can the ministry provide examples of significant projects where this balance has been successfully achieved?
Thanks very much for the question. Alberta's government understands how important meaningful and thorough consultation with Indigenous communities is when evaluating and facilitating major economic projects that could have adverse effects on treaty rights and traditional uses. The Alberta government's consultation policies strike the right balance. We respect treaty rights, harvesting and traditional uses, as well as the economic interests of all communities that stand to benefit from new developments. We are committed to ensure Indigenous communities share in these benefits, and we will continue to ensure we meet our legal and constitutional duty to consult. During consultation, we focus on understanding and considering the potential adverse impacts of proposed projects on treaty rights, traditional uses, or harvesting activities, with a view to substantially addressing them. Industry proponents follow the Alberta government's consultation policies and guidelines to fulfill the delegated procedural aspects of consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll cede my time to MLA de Jong.
Go ahead, MLA de Jong.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to my colleagues as well, to the ministry officials for joining us this morning. We've had some great discussions so far and great questions asked, and I want to focus on how the department is ensuring that Indigenous communities are meaningfully engaged. And I see on page 22 of the annual report that the ministry plays a coordinating role in ensuring that Indigenous communities are meaningfully engaged on nation building and infrastructure projects, particularly through the federal Investing in Canada infrastructure program. So my question to the officials is what is your role, and how is Indigenous relations ensuring that Indigenous communities are adequately supported and meaningfully engaged to participate in these critical and these major projects?
Thanks for the question. Indigenous Relations is mandated to collaborate with other ministry partners and the federal government to support and deliver programs, initiatives, and services that support community, social, and economic development for Indigenous communities in Alberta. This also supports reconciliation and includes initiatives such as ICIP or Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. Indigenous Relations' role in the ICIP program is to manage the relationships with and provide support to Indigenous communities and help them navigate the federal ICIP process. The department works closely with Indigenous communities, Alberta Infrastructure and Housing, Infrastructure, and Communities Canada to ensure program delivery is timely and aligned with community priorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now like to cede my time to my colleague MLA Roswell.
Thank you very much. I'd like to look at Performance Measure 2A, which is the initiatives addressing violence against women and girls. This measure tracks the number of initiatives funded rather than the direct impacts. So I'd just like to know, how do you collect the data to evaluate the performance, this performance measure?
Thanks for the question. I'm going to ask Christina Midbo, the Executive Director of the program, to address that question.
Thank you, Donovan. So thank you for the question. The communities, so the Community Support Fund is a $4 million annual grant fund that supports Indigenous-led projects and initiatives that reduce violence and increase the safety and economic security of Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+ people. Currently, the impact of the Community Support Fund is measured by the number of initiatives funded in a year, and data sources and performance measures continue to evolve. So the target of 20 funded targets assumes that all funded initiatives under the Community Support Fund receives the maximum amount available per year, which is $200,000. So the ministry collects this data directly from our partners and using an internal tracking record, and we use that performance measure because it's a clear and transparent way to demonstrate program activity and accountability for the funds, and it shows how many communities and organizations are being supported through this program. So I would add that we recognize that this measure reflects activity or outputs rather than impact. So to address this, we are working with our Indigenous partners to support capacity building in data collection and outcomes reporting. So we are looking to work with our partners to help develop performance measures that are culturally appropriate and safe and trauma-informed, and those future measures will help assess the substantive impact that these initiatives are having in community.
Okay, that's good to, because that was my thought. I was just, why track grants, why not track impacts? So if you're working on to that and that's coming forward, that's great. And you've kind of explained a little bit about why the target was less than the actual, and and I see that $200,000 you try to maximize it. But did you were any that were funded less than, like if there's no need to fund it to the $200,000, is that like why do you push for that, or why not just fund the program as required and do as many you can and then measure the impacts like you talked about?
Many applications, the applicants did not request the full $200,000. So because we were able to, because they did not request the full amount, we were able to have other funds available to support those additional 4 programs.
So will you adjust your targets going forward then, or how, you're working on a budget and you must have averages from past years and as to what the application amount was, and then if people know that you could fund more, you might get is it created a lack of applications, and I'm just wondering if people, there's only 20, and would it create an issue where people may not apply because they don't think only a certain number of applicants are going to get approved?
The target of 20 funded initiatives will remain unless there is either an increase to the current CSF annual budget of $4 million, a decrease in the maximum amount available to fund a project or initiative, or we are able to partner with other funders to coordinate investment and expand the number of initiatives that we can support.
So you mentioned other funders, so what kind of other funders are there?
So we would look to our partners in other ministries to fund with us. There are, the federal government, we would engage to see if they would be available to partner with us to support a particular initiative. And communities are also, providing in-kind services or putting in their own funding to help advance their interests and priorities in preventing and reducing violence against Indigenous.
Thank you. I will go back to the official opposition members for a 10-minute block. Member Urbanko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you everybody for being here this morning. So I can better understand your activities and approaches to outcome 2. May I reference a specific example? Original research was published this year in the Canadian Journal of Emergency Medicine, Mr. Chair, to quantify differences in emergency department visit characteristics for First Nations females versus non-First Nations females in Alberta. Findings suggested a lack of access to culturally safe primary and specialty care, recommending that ED providers must understand the conditions that underlie First Nations women's visits, that quote unquote does not blame patients for the number or type of ED visits they require. Given the 100 education sessions that have been provided, I believe under the Indigenous Learning Initiative in 24-25, is this the type of occurrence in which your department would collaborate with a ministry on?
Sorry, just trying to understand the second part of which occurrence?
The occurrence, well, the finding that Alberta Health and various aspects of the health ministry are not meeting the needs of First Nations women in the same way that they're meeting non-First Nations needs. And so given the outcome 2 of collaborating across ministries to build capacity, to advise, to support in terms of regulation policy and the delivery of programs, is this an example? It's vague in the annual report about how that collaboration actually kind of manifests. And so using this as an example, could you advise on whether or not this is something that your ministry would be involved in?
Yes, thank you for that clarification. So I'll offer the first part, and then I'll turn it back to Christina, who can maybe offer a more specific example, because you mentioned the Indigenous Learning Initiative that we put on. Right, and that is much broader. That deals with sort of treaty rights, that deals with First Nations, Métis, Inuit in the province. It deals with sort of in a very broad way. It's really Indigenous Education 101 is probably the best way to, we don't delve into, really specific examples such as the one you raised. But having said that, because you'd mentioned the Indigenous Learning Initiative, so I just wanted to clarify what the Indigenous Learning Initiative does and does not do.
Outcome 2. So okay, so
Yeah.
that's not the space where that capacity would be
Right.
built
So
within a different department.
I'll ask Christina to offer a better answer than I just did.
So we work with partners across the GOA, and that includes my colleagues in the Indigenous Health Division in what is now primary and preventative health. The ADM attended meetings with all 3 councils that my team supports, the Premier's Council on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit Plus People, and the First Nations and Métis Women's Councils on Economic Security. They talked about a number of issues that Indigenous women, girls, and 2S plus people experience in the healthcare system. They shared personal experiences, and my understanding is that work was important to the Indigenous Health Division in their work to address anti-racism in the healthcare system.
Is that level of importance measured in any way by your ministry to determine whether or not the engagement is effective? in changing practice.
Right, so in the 2024-2025, it's difficult yet to see the impact. So it takes time to implement change and to see the impact that that change has in communities. And so it's to still be determined, and perhaps next year we'll have a better answer.
To see it in another annual report. Thank you. I'll cede the rest of my time, Mr. Chair, to my colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Alberta government's gender-based violence prevention page states that 63% of Indigenous women have experienced physical and sexual violence in their lifetime, compared to 45% non-Indigenous women. An alarming 43% of Indigenous women have been sexually assaulted since age 15, compared to 30% of non-Indigenous women. Now, we know the homicide rate for Indigenous women is 5 times higher than it is for non-Indigenous women. Now, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Roadmap was released in 2020, and we have a 10-year strategy to end gender-based violence. So can the department explain to the committee how the provincial funding strategy of short-term grants and announcements will reduce gender-based violence in Alberta, and particularly gender-based violence towards Indigenous women and girls?
I'll ask Christina to respond.
Thank you for that question. We recognize the overrepresentation of Indigenous women in all kinds of areas, employment, education, housing, poverty. So it's a real...
My question really is about the short-term nature of the grants. So there are inherent problems with short-term grants as opposed to long-term grants where you can just do different work. That commitment is there. There's some safety and security. So my question is, how is it that the department feels that these short-term grants will help reduce gender-based violence towards Indigenous women and girls?
So I would... we have some partnerships that we provide multi-year grants with. So, for example, the Institute for the Advancement of Aboriginal Women, we just concluded the final year of a 5-year contribution agreement. We will begin discussing with the IAAW another multi-year grant agreement so that we can provide some sustainable funding to the organization. With that funding, the IAW has been able to expand the programs they offer, and they're doing really great work. This Community Support Fund also provides multi-year grants. So, for example, in 2023-24, we have provided a 3-year grant to the Elizabeth Métis settlement. So we do recognize that sometimes a 1-year program is not sufficient to really see those impacts we want to see in community. We also, when we are working with grant applicants, we also talk to them about sustainability and talk to them about how this program or project may continue with or without government funding. So we're mindful of that, and we do our best.
Build on what one of the members said in an earlier block. It was about, the department seems to rely on the number of grants and the type of grants and where they're going to demonstrate that they're being successful in some way. But, given the horrific stats of violence and homicide, that we're really looking for a place. Can you point to any place that we can look at and see that the trend is changing? Because it doesn't appear that way. We look at, Alberta Council of Women's Shelters for anecdotal information or even statistics about how many people are turned away. That's not getting any better. I think the trend is getting worse, the number of people turned away. I don't think the incidents of violence are getting any better. And so is there anywhere in the report, I couldn't find anything to say these investments we're making are actually working and the trend is changing? Is there anything that the department can point us to that we can look at today and then a year from now, hopefully look back and say, what progress have you made?
Sorry, I'm trying to formulate my answer. Could you repeat that question,
So
sorry.
what I'm looking for is, we meet hopefully once a year for this ministry to talk about, these investments were made here and here, and here's the progress. Here's what we anticipated the outcome to be, and here's where we are. There is no place here for us to measure, is there a trend, is it changing about the violence towards Indigenous women and girls? So we see the investments, we've heard the department explain where the money is being invested, but what is changing in terms of, there's a 10-year strategy to end violence, there's, a roadmap from 2020, but where is the progress? What progress have we made? How many lives are being saved?
We work with Indigenous partners. Indigenous ways of knowing and being are critical to solutions to address and prevent violence against Indigenous communities, people. It's not just a government issue to be addressed. So it's all of society, and we provide opportunities to organizations, agencies, and government ministries to work with and collaborate with those women's councils and the Premier's Council. So change takes time. We approach our work and Indigenous communities.
Thank you. We will now move back to government members for 10 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the department for being here today. I'd like to talk a little bit about treaty land entitlements and the claims, particularly on page 22 of the annual report. The ministry has an ongoing role to resolve treaty land and claim entitlements, including the recent progress on Lubicon and Peerless Lake Trout Nation. A number of questions around that. Why is the government of Alberta party to the federal land claim negotiations?
Wait, just repeat that very last sentence.
Why is the government of Alberta a party to federal land claim negotiations?
Thanks for the question, and it's a good one. Treaty land entitlement is actually one of my my favorite things to be involved in the ministry, because it's it deals with some very broad and important issues around providing the appropriate land base to First Nations. So the government of Alberta has a constitutional obligation pursuant to paragraph 12 of the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement. So when Alberta, Saskatchewan were created as provinces, the land base resources, natural resources, were not provided to Alberta and Saskatchewan. That changed in 1930 with the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement. So our obligation is to provide unoccupied Crown land to the federal government as they fulfill their treaty obligations to First Nations. So I think you would appreciate the treaty obligation, or the treaty relationship, is between the federal government and the First Nation. But our job as the owner of the land is to provide unoccupied Crown land. So when treaty was entered into, and here in Alberta, we have 3 historic treaties, Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and Treaty 8. Treaty 6, I think, was signed in 1876, I'm doing this by memory. Treaty 7 in 1877, and Treaty 8 in 1899. So one of the first things the federal government did when it entered into treaty was to determine the quantum of land that is owing to First Nations. And generally speaking, 128 acres for every man, woman, and child is provided to First Nations pursuant to treaty. But when treaty was entered into over 150 years ago, many people, sometimes whole families, segments of a nation, were missed. They might have been out on the trap line. They might have been out hunting. The treaty commissioners did the best they could, but they didn't cover all of the communities. So many people were missed. So it really is a formula. It's 128 acres times the number of people who were originally surveyed. But if that original survey was inadequate or missed dozens of people, then the federal government has a responsibility, and beginning in the 1980s, they started fulfilling those original treaty obligations through the Treaty Land Entitlement Program. Our job is to provide, as I say, unoccupied Crown land. We provide it to Canada. Canada then provides it to the First Nation, who after a period of time, it is added to reserves and it becomes part of that First Nations reserve. That's sort of a thumbnail sketch of how treaty land entitlement works. So we've got a very important role to play, and it's a constitutional responsibility. We have no choice, and we gladly meet that obligation by providing land to Canada as they fulfill their original treaty obligations. Thanks for the question.
Thank you for the answer. I guess another question is, what is Alberta's policy then to approach to settling the treaty land claims?
Sure. And it's related to the answer on the first question. I mean, our policy is to fulfill treaty land entitlement as efficiently and as quickly as possible, because it brings stability. It brings predictability. I'm sure you've read in what's going on in BC, because they didn't have historic treaties. So the question of title is an unsettled question in much of BC. That is not the issue here in Alberta. It's not an unsettled question through the historic treaties. So our policy is to work with Canada and nations. There are almost always tripartite negotiations, Canada, Alberta, and the First Nation. Sometimes the negotiations take quite a bit of time. And the reason for that is the debt has been outstanding or owing to the First Nation, as you can appreciate, for well over 100 years. If a band or a First Nation was, quote, shortchanged in, say, 1876, and they were shortchanged by, say, 20 people, I'm not going to pull out a calculator and do the calculation, but you can do it. 20 times 128, it shows the shortfall. But now it's been owing to that First Nation for well over 100 years, since 1876, hypothetically. So that's why the negotiations get really interesting and somewhat complex, because the debt has been owing to the nation for more than a century. So your question is, what's our policy? To settle those as quickly and as efficiently, with recognizing that, providing more land to First Nations provides a bigger land base on which economic development can occur. So it helps, business development, economic development. So it's, we generally view it as a very positive thing. And it brings predictability and certainty to industry. I mean, they want to know, is there an outstanding land claim in the area in which they're working? And for the most part, there isn't. I mean, there's not a lot of outstanding treaty land entitlement claims. Off the top of my head, I'm going to say there's 5 or 6. They come from the federal government. That's where they originate. They don't originate with us. As we're invited to those conversations, we verify on our own, we verify what is the outstanding amount, if you will, the outstanding land. We do our own due diligence. And then we enter into tripartite negotiations with Canada and the First Nation to provide land. And then a lot of times some top-up funding is provided. In the case of Peerless Trout, we built 2 schools. It's a really exciting area of work that the department, that the government does. And when we do settle these historic land claims, I mean, I mentioned in my opening remarks the Lubicon. The Lubicon were the only nation in Alberta that never had a land base to begin with. They were completely landless. So all the other nations I'm talking about, there was a shortfall that was provided to them. They got the original amount. In many cases, it wasn't enough. So we're addressing the shortfall. But in the case of the Lubicon, there was no land provided. whatsoever. So in 2018, the government achieved a land claim settlement with the Lubicon together with Canada. And so that was the very last band, the only and last band in Alberta that did not have a land base. Now they do, 95 square miles. Canada provided a few $100 million to build their community, and that work is going on. It's exciting, it's important, and it changes, it changes the fabric of those communities.
So do the boundaries of some of these bands change sometimes? Is it always, or is it sometimes in lieu of, cash in lieu of boundary? How does that work?
Yeah, that's an excellent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm raising a point of order under 23B, so speaks to matters other than the question under discussion. Of course, as we know, public accounts is where we review the work of the department and look at the achievements it's made, the failures that it's experienced, and press the government to do better. This member's question is really leaning into policy and practice, not related at all actually to performance or outcomes of the department. And so I think this question is out of order, and I request that the member move on to something that's actually within the scope of the committee.
Yeah, I just think that, he's referred to the page number. It is about treaty land claims and an expansion of that. So I think he should be allowed to ask his question.
Thank you. I think one of the questions asked by member was the government policy on this. That was straight about government policy, and I had a hard time connecting it with the public account mandate, although I thoroughly enjoyed Deputy Minister's answer and reference to Lubicon First Nation, which I was part of, and we were negotiating that we were in the government. But that question does kind of speaks more to the policy. Here we are looking at not the policy, merits of the policy, but what was done, how it was done, whether what government said they will do, department said they will do, did they do that, and how we measure that. So I will just caution you to kind of keep the questions related to the committee's mandate and not the government policy.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so apart from the compensation paid to Canada for the benefit of First Nations, what are some of the third-party implementation costs associated with these settlements then?
Thanks for the question, and it really varies from treaty land entitlement to treaty land entitlement, but there are third-party interests that have to be satisfied. Sometimes they relate to trappers. If there are, a dozen trappers affected by a treaty land entitlement claim, then we have to compensate. We have to, buy out those trappers, if you will. A lot of time it relates to, pipeline, power lines, utilities, whatever is sort of in that selected land. Those third-party interests have to be dealt with. They vary from negotiation to negotiation, but they are dealt with.
Thank you. We will go back to the official opposition for third rotation of 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, I cover a few different bases here, so thanks for taking the time. It'll be a quick 10 minutes, I reckon. 4 First Nations communities, Deputy Minister, and 1 Métis Nation are awaiting addiction recovery communities in the province. Some have been waiting 5 years or more. How is your ministry fulfilling Objective 2.2 in making sure that this work happens in a culturally appropriate way, informed by Indigenous people to advance reconciliation?
Thanks for the question. I mean, the real mandate rests with mental health and addiction. They're the department that really will oversee the construction of those recovery centers. But our involvement really relates to, say, interdepartmental liaison and coordination. We will, meet with those nations from time to time. But the real mandate rests with mental health and addiction.
So the mandate letter for 2023 for Indigenous Relations specifically does in fact mandate your ministry to work with the mental health and addiction. They are the lead, but it is specifically in your mandate to help to advance that work. We're 5 years and waiting. None of them have been built. What were your activities, 24 to 25, that helped to achieve some progress on those projects?
Well, and I'll ask Don Quast to chip in a minute, but let me say that our work is really around ensuring that the priorities of the nation, the interest of the nation are brought to bear.
And how did that work take place in the last fiscal?
It takes place in numerous places. We have protocol agreements with Treaty 6, with Treaty 7. We have protocol agreements with the Métis settlements. So through those protocol agreements and those tables that are established, conversations happen. We call them chief to chief. They're really chief to minister. So it happens through those tables, led by ministers and led by chiefs. And it happens in bilateral meetings, direct bilateral meetings between the minister and between chiefs.
I'd like to hear then from Mr. Quast if perhaps there's a bit more specific detail on what those conversations have contained. Is your ministry encouraging stronger progress on achieving these goals?
Absolutely, we are. We work directly with officials from Mental Health and Addiction Ministry in supporting their engagement efforts with Indigenous communities, whether it's with First Nations, Métis settlements, independent Métis communities, or those that are represented by the Métis Nation of Alberta. We work with, as Deputy mentioned, the ministries in fulfilling the obligations that the Government of Alberta has made within the protocol agreements that we have signed with the two Treaty 7 tribal councils, with Treaty 6, and we hope going forward with Treaty 8.
Okay, they've been waiting a long time. I hope that what we can certainly be doing is ensuring, we're talking about hundreds of people that are going to be going through those recovery communities, and of course, given the disproportionate impact of Indigenous people living with substance use and addiction concerns, I hope we can all feel a greater sense of urgency in terms of actually seeing that work progress. Total pivot here, I'd like to address the water tie-ins question in annual report 24-25. I believe it's on page 24. So in budget 2019, Alberta's government committed $100 million to bring regional drinking water infrastructure to First Nations reserve boundaries where feasible. In the following year, according to the report again, there was an announcement of an additional $13 million for Ermineskin Cree Nation to do exactly that. Now, in the report, it says that as of March 31, 2024, so in fact a period outside of the time of this particular annual report, 5 projects had been completed. But it's not really an activity, Mr. Chair, to be reported in this particular annual report. Pertinent to 24-25, the annual report references meetings for Ermineskin exclusively, but I'm hoping the Deputy Minister or one of his colleagues can provide a more fulsome update. What role did the ministry play in advancing the conversations with North Red Deer Water Services Commissions to help achieve progress on this particular project? And were those activities funded by the $13 million earmarked for Ermineskin?
Thanks for the question. I'll ask Don Quast to provide an answer.
So there absolutely were ongoing discussions with Ermineskin Cree Nation and North Red Deer. We worked with the lead ministry for this program, Transportation and Economic Corridors. That's where the water tie-in program lives, and the funding is provided through them, and they have a contribution agreement that's been signed with the Water Commission to complete the work to bring the pipe up to the reserve boundary for Ermineskin. And then we know that there was a cost estimate to extend that regional drinking water line from Pinoka to the boundary of Ermineskin, and it was 53.2 million plus an additional 3.6 million for Ermineskin's buy-in to the Water Commission for an overall total for that project of 56.8 million.
And what proportion of that 56 million and change and plus, I'm sorry, I missed the final number. What percentage of that is actually allocated or paid for through the $100 million 2019 allocation?
It is, I think now altogether above and beyond 100 million, and the commitment, I believe, is 151 million altogether.
How much of that $100 million from the 2019 commitment remains?
I think the spend to date of the original 100 million is 93.2 million. So there's 6 and change left from the original commitment.
Do you have a sense of how many First Nations reserves still require that type of infrastructure investment so that we're bringing the water infrastructure right up to the boundary?
That would be a question that would probably be best answered by our federal colleagues, Indigenous Services Canada, which has the responsibility for dealing with water infrastructure on reserve.
What about up to reserve though, Mr. Quas?
We work with the federal government and with the First Nations as projects are identified to be able to bring the water lines up to the reserve boundary. We have not been getting a whole lot of traction with our federal colleagues in the last couple years with respect to using the water tie-in program as the means that they prefer to provide water. What we have seen, from our federal colleagues is that they have been investing money in water treatment plants on reserve as opposed to using this program necessarily.
Okay, so I'm basically hearing then, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm basically hearing that the $100 million allocation is pretty well used up. We're at about 93% allocated, and there is currently no other additional dollars earmarked for either within your ministry or within transportation and economic corridors to see that there be additional investment in that area.
We're working on. Go ahead. Yeah, the Ermineskin project right now is the last one that we're working on from this commitment, and we would be happy to continue to work with our federal colleagues or...
I've got one more question, and it is kind of pertinent, I think, salient to some of the points that have been raised here around outputs versus outcomes. I'm glad to hear that progress has been made in terms of adopting the recommendations from the Auditor General, and I'm not really sure why we're still, 13 months in and waiting for an assessment, but I do look forward to hearing about how that progresses. The output versus outcome, this annual report still has far more output than outcome in terms of the actual measurement of impact. What was the implementation within your ministry to rise to the occasion and meet the recommendation of the Auditor General when I still see in this annual report output more than outcome? What's the work that you've done to adopt the recommendation?
We have worked very closely with the Auditor General's office to develop
Then thank you. We will move back to the government members. Emily Lovely.
Thank you so much, Chair. Before I get to my question, I just wanted to comment to the team that I had the opportunity to bring a number of constituents in to see Minister Wilson when he held the portfolio. And each meeting would share with us the successes that the ministry had in terms of helping people in community, specifically getting businesses going. And he would have a little thank you gift from each one of these and had a story that was so meaningfully tied to the success
Point of order.
These initiatives.
Emily,
So thank you.
The point of order is
Thank you. Again, Under 23B, speaks to matters other than the question under discussion. You know, if the member from Camrose wants to tell us about the lovely meeting she's had with the Minister of Indigenous Relations, she's more than welcome to do that at any other point of our time here in the legislature, but public accounts is not the place to even discuss the activities of the minister. It's the department's activities in the 24-25 fiscal year that are the focus, and so I ask that the member from Camrose be cautioned against telling us these kinds of stories and focusing on questioning the department.
Yeah, I think she's probably building context towards her actual question, so I would ask that she be allowed to do that.
Okay, I guess I won't find point of order, but members just, I guess, get to the question, so continue.
Perfect. Well, actually, I was getting to my question, but I do want to just stress that there were a number of successes that the minister had shared with me. And now to my question. On page 53 of the annual report, there is a shortfall in revenues from premiums, fees, and licenses. Can the deputy minister provide more detail on why revenues fell short and what steps are being taken to stabilize these revenue sources?
Thanks for the question. I'm going to ask Shakib Siddiqui, the ADM of Finance, to answer that question. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the question. So with respect to the shortfall on premiums, fees, and licenses, this is predominantly attributed to the Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, AIOC. So AIOC, they charge a setup fee when we issue a loan guarantee. This covers the cost of advisory services and a defined term loan guarantee. In 24-25, the fee revenue decreased, as referenced earlier. There were fewer deals closed than expected during this time. Most significantly, Project Aspen did not come through in 24-25, meaning the fees associated with that $1 billion loan guarantee were not realized by the department, or pardon me, by AIOC. This would have been the largest loan guarantee in AIOC history. As mentioned, Project Aspen did not close due to a structural issue identified by TC Energy prior to closing. There was another transaction that was delayed due to uncertainty related to restructuring of the Alberta power market, and other deals considered in 24-25 did not close due to unacceptable risk-reward profiles. So in summary, that shortfall is owing to AIOC and the number of deals concluded in 24-25.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the answer. And with that, I'll cede my time to my next colleague.
I want to give you an opportunity. I'm going to circle back for a minute. In the 2024-25 annual report, the ministry noted that it had completed implementation of the May 2022 Auditor General recommendation on performance reporting, shifting from an output-based model to an outcome-focused approach. So can you share with us what key lessons the ministry learned from implementing this new performance reporting framework?
Sure, thank you. I'll ask Don Quas, who oversees the program and that audit, to respond.
So what we have established in since 2023 is a robust reporting and continuous improvement framework, which included development of new and enhanced performance measures, an annual program review, along with quarterly and annual reporting processes. The framework has allowed our ministry to develop logic models and performance measures, strengthen the sources and methods of our data collection, and then we work with communities on how data is collected and used by our ministry. Our enhanced performance measures provide more timely and meaningful data for decision-making.
Just follow up. Are the lessons being used to inform future program design, accountability mechanisms, and how is that progress being communicated to Albertans?
Sure. Our improvement in performance reporting framework, as I mentioned earlier, includes an annual program review, and we also do a performance measure review, which allows our programs to make timely and informed updates or enhancements to our programs, along with the changes to performance measures and data collection to ensure that the data that we collect reflects the outcome that it's intended to support. And how we communicate this is we share our results in our ministry's annual report.
Thanks very much for that. Chair, I'll cede my time to my colleague.
Thank you, Emily Sawyer. I note on page 21 of the annual report that the AIOC expanded its sector mandate to include tourism in 24-25, but hasn't yet approved any projects in that sector. So I'm wondering, what was the rationale for expanding that mandate, and particularly why was a sector-specific approach chosen rather than a sector-agnostic model?
Thanks very much for the question. The AIOC initial focus was on the natural resource sector, energy, mining, and forestry, due to its importance to Alberta's economy, as well as its potential to provide significant benefits to Indigenous communities. The Alberta government's original approach to sector expansion was initially very cautious, aiming to reduce risk while adapting to the changing priorities of Indigenous communities and the province's broader economic goals. At the creation of the AIOC, Indigenous communities were already expressing an interest in expanding the AIOC's mandate beyond the natural resource sectors. And your second one about the rationale, in 2022, increasing interest for sector expansion from Indigenous communities, combined with the need for the province to maximize all available mechanisms to hasten Alberta's post-COVID-19 recovery, made it the right time to expand into telecommunication, agriculture, and transportation. In 2024, Alberta's government launched a long-term provincial tourism strategy focused on 5 pillars, including Indigenous tourism. Indigenous Relations sought to expand the AIOC's mandate into the tourism sector to ensure Indigenous groups are prepared to be partners in Alberta's new tourism strategy. These expansions demonstrate Indigenous Relations' adaptability to better align the AIOC's mandate with Alberta's economic priorities, ensuring Indigenous communities can participate and access emerging opportunities in Alberta's growing economy. And in relation to your last question around, not having, sort of being sector agnostic, rather than adopting a sector agnostic approach, Alberta's government pursued a targeted expansion strategy focusing on sectors with strong growth potential and long-term stability. This approach aligns with both Indigenous and government priorities, helping to reduce risk and deliver sustainable long-term benefits for Indigenous communities. The AIOC maintains a very low threshold for risk tolerance, and each opportunity is assessed through that lens before a loan guarantee can be issued. To date, AIOC has faced challenges identifying suitable investment opportunities in its expanded sectors, as larger companies are often reluctant to engage due to low capital needs and potential complexities, while smaller firms typically lack the financial stability or asset quality required to meet AIOC's strict eligibility criteria. AIOC remains committed to supporting viable opportunities when Indigenous communities and industry partners identify the right fit. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Deputy. I'll now cede my time to my colleague, Emily Rosenthal.
I'll maybe start now and wrap it up when we come back, but I'd like to talk to the Aboriginal Consultation Office timelines and capacity. In the annual report, particularly on page 22 of the report, it's reported that Aboriginal Consultation Office, ACO, reviewed approximately 8,400. Okay, we'll come back to that.
Thank you. Before I start this rotation, I note that we are already at 10:44 and I have 10:20, almost 27 minutes of agenda to go through. So a couple of options. Both sides can make this fourth rotation shorter, 5 minutes each, and fifth rotation 2 minutes. That's how we can go through it. Or with unanimous consent, committee can extend the duration of this meeting. So first I will ask if it's agreeable to cede 5 minutes from your time. We can take that route.
So what are you asking, Chair?
That we have at least 27 minutes of agenda left, but the time on the clock is 10:45, only 15 minutes. So either we can extend the meeting or adjust the next block time to go through the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'd like to keep our time as it is.
That's fine. But we can't extend.
You can't extend?
Well, we can't extend.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to note that while the Deputy Minister was reading his scripted response to Member de Jong's question about the AIOC, he noted that the AIOC is actually struggling to meet its mandate, particularly with respect to loan guarantees in the tourism sector, and yet they get 15% pay increases year over year. It's a shocking failure by the department to hold the AIOC to account, and in fact, they're rewarding failure by allowing executive compensation to skyrocket, and this is no way to manage a government department or a government crown agency. But my questions are about performance measures, particularly performance measure 1A. The Auditor General took the department to task for not providing meaningful performance measures, particularly around the EPP. Now, the department said that it had implemented the recommendations and they were ready for follow-up, and yet we didn't see any changes in the annual report. So can the department explain why there were no changes to measuring the outcomes of the program, and when we can expect to see those in the annual reports?
I'll ask Don Quast to respond.
So we did provide to the Auditor General's office a report, a plan for dealing with the recommendations that came to us from their 2022 program audit. We provided that in November of 2024, and that plan outlined the changes that we would be making to our performance reporting in our economic programs, so Aboriginal Business Investment Fund and Employment Partnerships Program. And we have been working with Auditor General's office to have them review our report. And in the meantime, we have been implementing what we provided to the Auditor General in that report. And we have a bit of a lag between what we put forward in our business plan and then what we report back in our annual report. We have developed new and different performance measures for our economic development programs, and we have developed logic models to use for those programs to make sure that we are appropriately working with grant recipients to capture the data that we need to be able to report on the progress that we achieve.
So is the department telling the committee that they're waiting for the data collection to happen before they start reporting on these new performance measures? Is that my understanding correct?
Well, we need to have the data reported from our grant recipients before we're able to report on it.
But I've seen this in past government reports. It is well within possibility. The department could have rolled out the new performance measures and just said, there's no data available because we're waiting to collect this. That was an option that was available to the department. Why didn't it take it for this annual report?
We are working, again, as I mentioned, to collect the data that we need to be able to report upon. We have our new performance measures outlined in the next year's business plan. And once we have our data gathered, we will report on the data.
So, with respect to the EPP in particular, can the ministry share how it intends to assess or determine whether that program is achieving objectives? We've heard already that there are performance measures in place. What are those performance measures going to be?
Well, we work with partner departments to utilize the funding that we get from the labor market transfer agreements for the Employment Partnerships Program. In this past year, we did see a reduction in funds from $4.5 million that we had been allocated before to the $4 million that we were able to deal with in the budget. And what we have been able to report upon is that we do have an estimated 1,300 Indigenous peoples.
Mr. Chair, my question wasn't what you've already reported on. I've read the annual report. I know what's been reported on. My question is, what additional performance measures has the department created in response to the Auditor General's recommendations? Just tell, the department has said that they have them. Just tell us what they are now. Just tell us.
They're in our next business plan.
I get
publicly
that,
available there.
Okay, so, Mr. Chair, just, the department has been happy to read scripted answers in response to UCP government backbencher questions. Just read for us then what the new performance measures are so that we
don't have that business plan here right before me.
The lack of preparation that this department.
Not surprising, the ringmaster called us a circus earlier, which is hilarious. So I'd like to raise 2 points of order. First point of order is 23B, where the member opposite, in his own wording, admitted that his question is about future performance measures. Clearly, he chastised our members for being on this committee for 2 years. Well, he's been on this game a lot longer. He should know the point of PAC is not to ask about future performance measures, so he admitted in his own question to a point of order on 23B. We'll also order for not the first time today, 23J, the member is using abusive and insulting language to our department officials, accusing them of not being prepared. I think we can all agree that the ministry officials have done quite a lot of preparation and come to this committee with the best of intentions. And keeps interjecting, so I'm proving my point on 23J, so I would like to submit those 2 points of orders. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And of course, Member Lunty is always in error, but never in doubt. With respect to 23B, the implementation of the Auditor General's recommendations is well within the realm of the work of public accounts. I'm simply asking the department how they've implemented the recommendations. This is perfectly within scope. The department refuses to answer the questions, but these questions are well within scope. So that is not a point of order. Now, with respect to the point of order 23J, I'm sorry that the members' feelings are hurt again. This is a recurring theme, but it's quite clear that the department has not come prepared to answer questions other than the ones that were submitted by the UCP backbenchers ahead of time. We've clearly seen the Deputy Minister reading from a script every time the backbenchers across the desk read a question, but every time we've asked a question, we've seen, I don't know the answer. I'm going to have to get back to you on that. I don't have that information today. So this is an accurate observation of the department's level of preparedness to appear at PAC today and not a point of order.
Thank you. I would note three things. I would say to both sides that when you're arguing point of order, go to this standing order that you're referring to and just tell me how it's violated and leave the other commentary on side. Second thing, with respect to question whether it's relevant, 23, that was under 23B, right? I think earlier this plan was discussed that about Auditor General, and even Auditor General, Deputy Auditor General commented that they're looking at it. So I think question is about that recommendation. I do not find that it's not relevant to the matter at hand. Questions could always be asked a bit more clearly to make them relate specifically to the report at hand or recommendation under question. Again, I would urge all members to use language that is more conducive to order, but at this point I don't find that the language used by the member rises to the level of 23J, and with that, member can continue.
Mr. Chair, I also called a point of order. We called one at the same time. May I?
Sure.
I actually was going to call on 23C because the question was something that I had already asked and had been answered.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Of course, we've been down this road of raising points of order under 23C a number of times on this committee. That's still no excuse.
Let him finish.
Yeah.
I think it's not appreciated that when you cross talk, so all communication should be through the chair.
You know, I understand that the member is new, but we continue to see they've got 4 or 5 or 6 staff members sitting behind them who should work to prepare the members to participate meaningfully in this committee. 23C, of course, persists in needless repetition or raises matters that have been decided during the current session. We continue to maintain, and the chair has consistently found, that it is up to the member to ask questions until they've either decided to move on or received a satisfactory answer. So I'm sorry again that the member's feelings were hurt that I asked another question, but this isn't a point of order.
Thank you, member. I don't find this to be a point of order. I didn't see a needless repetition, or I don't think member was raising matter that are already decided in this session, so it's not a point of order. Go ahead, Member Renault.
Just Deputy Minister, earlier in this meeting, my colleague talked about Jordan's principle, and you referenced a number of letters that your department was working with other ministries to encourage some work. So I want to specifically talk about persons with developmental disabilities and family supports for children with disabilities. As you may know, that families are unable to procure a contract if they live on reserve for these important supports for their children or for their dependent adults. So I'm wondering if you could tell me if that ministry was part of the group of letters that you described.
I don't believe it was.
It was not part of the group of letters where you were encouraging work on Jordan's principle?
We were dealing specifically with the absence or the pulling back of federal funding in the education sector as it relates to...
Has your ministry been involved at all in any discussion or work or joint work with another ministry to ensure that families and children and people with disabilities that choose to live on reserve and stay on reserve can procure a contract with government? Have you been involved in any way to sort of move that along?
I don't recall that we have been in this year, 24, 25,
By that ministry at all for any assistance whatsoever?
not that I recall.
So no work whatsoever to increase the number of contracts procured by families with people with disabilities on reserve, nothing?
Well, that would likely be a question for Children and Family
No,
Services.
that's a question for this ministry.
Well, no,
So my
because-
question is, you talked earlier about the work that you were doing around Jordan's Principle. You referenced a number of ministries that you were pushing forward and doing some work. I believe that the deputy minister said he would table those letters for the committee, if I'm not mistaken.
Chair, if I could answer the question? So the member doesn't have a good understanding of the role of Indigenous relations.
Back to my question. My question was about the work.
That
the
kind of
ministry-
language is not helpful. She asked a question, it's not in order. We can talk about it, but again, I would urge department officials, all members, to use the language that is respectful. And also at this time, it's already 11 o'clock, and I will call for a motion that this meeting be adjourned. So moved by MLA Roswell, and this meeting stands adjourned.